there! Today we're going to learn how to paint Stephanie and her watermelon using watercolors. So I thought this would be a perfect picture to do for summertime. So I usually begin by starting with the undertones. So I usually start a base layer with my watercolors. Basically I'm looking for all the neutrals and all the plainer colors that are underneath everything else. So in this case she's got a warm tone skin, olive skin tone. So I begin with that using some yellow, a little bit of red, and a little bit mixture of blue to get that perfect skin tone. And I'm just layering it on. So I'm keeping everything light, keeping in mind that watercolor will always dry lighter than you had originally painted it. So painting a little darker, but you'll notice that it lightens as it dries. And then I start with the watermelon, the same way with the skin tone, just really building up that soft pink, warm pink, and some yellow on the rind of the watermelon, and the skin tone on their fingers as well. I like to put yellow underneath all greens and bright colors. It just helps the picture brighten up later on. Step 2, I start building up all of the colors. So everything's on there now essentially, and I'm just coming in with all the different shadows. I start with the lighter shadows and work up from there. Keep in mind that everything in watercolor might bleed into each other if the first layer isn't dry. So sometimes I'll use a blow dryer, or if it's a sunny day, it usually will dry fast enough before I get to this layer. So here I just keep on building up and building up. You'll notice that I don't go too dark too quickly, but I'll go over a certain area numerous times. As you can see, quite another layer of brown over here for her skin. Building up her little nose. And it could feel a little bit redundant going over the same areas over and over, but it really helps to control where all the color is going to go. And it also helps each area dry before you're putting the next layer on there. So as you can see, I move from her face over to her fingers to give her face some time to dry. Moving over to her watermelon to notice how you put green on top of yellow, it gets really bright, so that's why I like doing that. And now speaking of color, we're on to saturation. And this is where I start to bring in the really bright tones. I wait until later to do this and build it on top of some lighter colors to help, first of all, control where the color is going to be, and also to help avoid letting those bright colors go into the larger areas when you start blending in the larger areas. So I like to add those in later on. But here, notice how I'm keeping a lot of areas light from underneath. I'm not covering up everything I've done before, because watercolor, you can't go backwards unless you're using gouache or some other material to lighten up your pigment and add white back onto your paper. You can't really do it with watercolor alone. So here you see me going really carefully, keeping the areas that I want to keep light, really light, getting around all those little crevices. Coming in with that dark olive greens for the watermelon now, and finally adding in some shadows for inside the eyes. You can see me also starting some lighter color into the hair. I don't do that in the beginning because the hair is going to be really dark, and like I said earlier, I worry about my watercolors bleeding into each other, so really dark areas that I know they're going to get really dark, I leave until the end. So now I'm going in with the darks, but not the darkest darks quite yet, adding in areas like the eyebrows, around her lips, just darker areas that aren't quite black or really dark yet, but now I added darks. So here you can see me filling in the eyes. I love to do eyes first when I'm usually drawing, but with watercolor I leave them till the end because I want to avoid the dark colors bleeding into everything else. It can be kind of nerve-wracking doing things like eyelashes, and if anything is still wet underneath, it's going to bleed into it. So really be careful about making sure that your paper is dry. These darks are what's going to really give your watermelon that juicy look, getting that dark, deep colors in there. It's also going to help make your picture kind of pop off the page by adding shadows behind everything. As you can see me doing here, adding shadows behind the fingers and darkening up that rind. Don't be afraid to go too dark. I know that a lot of people get really nervous with watercolors to do that, but as long as you build up the layers underneath and that your paper is dry enough, you should be totally fine to add in all those darks. And here I'm starting to tone the hair just as I did with the skin tone and the watermelon and everything else. But like I said, the hair gets really dark and I was worried it was going to bleed into everything else. Also, I wanted to get the skin in between all the hair before I started the hair itself, like underneath the bangs, which is why I left that till then. But it'd be a really tedious process, but really building in all those little individual hairs, letting each layer dry in between, like I let it dry right there, and then adding in another layer of hair on top of it. The original photo is really dark, and I wanted her to have this sunburst effect, kind of like there's a bright light behind her. So you can see me here kind of leaving it unfinished in the edges, and that was intentional for this particular painting. But you can also mask off the edges if you'd like. There's a lot of different techniques for that. But here I just wanted to give it that raw edge. You can see me going more and more with those darks. So now going again with the darkest skin tones, really getting in all those little wrinkles in the fingers, edges of things. And so this is the time to do that. You don't want to do it too early because it'll just blend out once you're adding other layers on top. So save some time to leave it till the end. And now, as I was saying earlier, I kind of did some of it earlier, but we're going on to the details now. And now I'm using a really fine brush and going in with just some really darker paints or brighter paints, just kind of really saturating things up. I also can sometimes switch on over to some different tools, which is what I'm doing here, adding in some brighter red to the pulps of the watermelon, just darkening some edges if you need to. And there you have it. Thank you for taking the time to paint with me today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to paint a realistic watercolor, and I hope to see you in the next one for more content like this.